drama and entertainment as well on the final weekend. Let's start off in Cardiff. I was at this game, and just like an utterly extraordinary scoreline. For me, it was best summed up when England scored that final try, and as they were lining up the conversion, it was Swing Low just being sung all around the Principality. Half the stadium was empty, and I was there thinking it's the first ever Wales-England game I've been to in Cardiff, and I was like, I've been watching on TV for years England teams go there and struggle even when Wales haven't been that good. It's a really tight game, and I've just watched an England team absolutely blitz the Welsh in their own backyard. I mean, Ben, it feels like England have been waiting for that sort of performance. I'm just not quite sure we expected it in that manner away against Wales in Cardiff.
Yeah, I think there's been so much talent on show in the Premiership, and we've been waiting to see that come alive on the international stage for England. And you know, I think Steve Borthwick's had his critics about his style of rugby, and I'm not sure that actually it was always, you know, let's go out and play like this. I just think they weren't playing to what they trained in the week leading up to, particularly that Scotland game, the week leading up to the fixture. So to finally start to get some momentum is brilliant for England. And I think, you know, we mentioned it, they were lucky against France with the drop passes. They were lucky with Finn Russell's missed kicks against Scotland. But in 2 years' time, if England are where they want to be in 2 years' time, no one will remember that. They'll just see the results, and England will have that confidence. The Italy game was a step up in terms of their performance, but then I think all English people, with how things have gone over the last couple of years, were a bit worried about the boys going to Cardiff and what sort of backlash against a team with nothing really to lose from the position they were in and what's happened in the past down there. And for them to not only win easily, but win so comprehensively and keep the foot on the throat, it is a big confidence boost for the players. I guess the big problem for England now is it's a Lions year, and so the next time they'll get together properly with all their players available won't be until the autumn, and you almost want to grasp that momentum. But the standard of performance and some of the rugby was outstanding, exactly what England needed. A few of the critics now might give them a little bit more slack, and you know, that's sport, isn't it? You just sometimes need a couple of lucky breaks to kickstart something, and then you can go on a decent run.
Tim, do you think it's the best performance of the Steve Borthwick era for England?
Well,
I guess the Ireland game, isn't it, in the Six Nations is the
Ireland
other one.
last year. Yeah. I mean, it's up there, isn't it? And rugby isn't easy. In some respects, it's very complicated, but it is simple. If you can physically dominate your opponent, everything else becomes a lot easier to do. And England just absolutely dominated Wales. And I was at the same time just like, yes, this is awesome to watch as an England fan. I did at the same time feel a bit sorry for those Welsh players and the fans. But then I was sort of thinking, hold on a minute, 2013, 2015 Rugby World Cup, Ben would remember 2005. I'm sure you didn't get an ounce of sympathy that night when you lost 11-9, Ben.
Not much. No.
So I thoroughly enjoyed that, whilst recognising the effort that the Welsh players were putting in and feeling bad for where they are, because the Six Nations and World Rugby needs a strong Wales. Did enjoy it.
I think there's going to be a lot of England fans.
Sorry, Alfie, just on that as well. Like, England fans loving it this weekend. But I'll tell you what, they'll only love it for 1 or 2 games if that happens, because you want your biggest rivals there. It's a bit, you know, as a Leicester player, I remember all the Leicester fans celebrating Northampton getting relegated until they realised they wouldn't have a derby next year. And it's that sort of feeling that the big game is to go to Cardiff or, you know, to play against Wales. You don't want that to become the easy rollover. And I think there's a lot of people in Wales at the moment that are fearing that, particularly with the structure of the union so much up in the air. You know, no one's sure about who's going to come in to coach, whether there are going to be, you know, the same number of regions as they've got now. So it's a really challenging time for Wales. And as an Englishman, although I want us to win every year, I don't want Wales to completely collapse.
Yeah, my brother messaged me over the weekend saying it confirmed what I've felt for a long time, that you can't beat Wales too much at rugby. But I agree with you, Ben, that it is one of those that almost a little bit what happened with the Wallabies for a long time. And we hope they've turned a corner after how we saw them perform in November, but where for a long time people almost became apathetic towards watching the Wallabies play, both in Australia and when they'd come overseas and tour here. And you wonder with Wales, don't you, like, I suppose that to put one positive spin on this result is they can't paper over the cracks. And I don't think they would have done anyway, would they, given the fact that it's, 17 defeats in a row and all the bad and negative and record-breaking for all the wrong reasons statistics that this team is going through. But if there is one thing that result will underpin, it's that they need change, don't they? They need change, and they need pretty drastic change to be able to correct this.
Yeah, they do. It's the national sport. Or it was the national sport. I'm not sure it is now, and that's a big concern. And part of that, the professional era hasn't helped Welsh rugby, partly because the commercial realities, and it's probably an easier game to get big sponsors in England than it is in Wales. So there's financial constraints that they've got, which is part of the problem. When they're not successful, they're going to find it harder to keep hold of those kids that having their eyes turned going to play football, and that's a big concern. But we have to have a strong Wales side, and the one glimmer of positivity for Welsh fans this weekend is at least they stopped the England under-20s winning the Grand Slam, and as a result they have a little bit of hope coming through the system, but it needs major overhaul, and it's not going to be an overnight fix. And that's the thing. Wales never want to be, really shouldn't be targeting just beating England every year. They should be competing to win the championship like they were in the glory years that we've already talked about.
Tell you what they need to do. England have pointed out the way. Just put as many fly halves and open side flankers in your team as you can, and you're sorted.
Great segue there, Tim, as well, to get us back onto England. I will just point out as well, I know plenty of people watching know that Wales have a director of rugby. We think that they're going to have to fill that role, and the head coach as well. Those two appointments are absolutely massive in terms of the game as a whole in Wales and this team specifically, so something to keep an eye on. You mentioned selection though, Tim. Talk to me about Borthwick's selection for this game, because there was only one recognised centre on the pitch, who they lost to an injury in Tommy Freeman. There were no recognised second rows on the bench, so Chandler Cunningham South had to play over a half of the game coming off and in the second row. And I was kind of thinking about this, and a lot of the reaction to his selection has been negative. Now, he's been justified by the result in itself, but more than that, and I know you watch a lot of South African rugby and follow the Springboks, and a big part of, I think, of what Rassie Erasmus has got so spot on with the Springboks, particularly in the last World Cup cycle, was developing the squad as a whole and having a squad capable of going to a World Cup and winning. And when I looked at that England selection, I just wondered whether there was a part of long-term planning for Steve Borthwick, of players having to problem solve, being out of position and being able to go and do a job. Now, I know that England, if they were playing away in Paris at the weekend, or if they were making the trip to Dublin, they probably wouldn't have selected that team. They were able to a degree, because they were playing a Welsh side not in a great place at the moment. But is there an element of it as well that this is long-term planning from Borthwick? This is Ben Earl could be popping up in the centres. This is players being able to jump around. And this is a squad that is capable of getting itself out of some tough situations.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating when you look around world rugby, this concept of a hybrid player, which actually, fair play to him, Eddie Jones was kind of the first one on the case with that, when he was talking about Jack Nowell being a flanker and he mentioned Ben Earl being a centre. It seems to be a development, and I think I'm wondering where this could play out in the next couple of years. But to your point about South Africa, absolutely massive. They've got total confidence, 3-4 people in every position. You can put any one of those players in and the performance doesn't drop, and that is the benchmark. It's very un-Borthwick-like to have done what he's done. He always struck me as a guy that was like, win the next game and everything else will take care of itself. I do think some of those selections were with a longer term thinking in mind, which made me nervous as well before Wales, but was vindicated. And if he can have that, it just felt like there was a bit of swagger in the selection from him, which is very not Borthwick. And if he can have that kind of confidence and flex every now and again, and just get that amount of energy on the pitch that you saw with all those back rows for England, and yeah, they could be cooking. But back to Ben's earlier point, don't read too much into one result against Wales. Long way to go.
But also on the selection, I think that's an amazing thing about this, is that Eddie Jones used to always speak about these things, but actually never really tended to do any of them. And Steve Borthwick, who we think of as a pragmatic, some people would say boring coach, I'm not saying that, but some people would level that at him, actually has been pretty bold and punchy in a lot of his selections. I think it's been pretty interesting from an England point of view. It's hard to pick out too many individual players, Ben, but there's a couple that I want to touch upon. First of all, Ben Curry, who has had to wait his time to get into this England team whilst he's seen his brother become one of the best players in the world. An exceptional Six Nations for Ben Curry and an exceptional performance in Cardiff.
I've always rated Ben Curry so highly. He always performs for Sale. You ask a lot of Sale fans and they think he's the better player. The great thing, I think, is that Tom Curry's had an awesome tournament as well. So I think Tom Curry's, for me, cemented himself in the Lions starting team. I think he's been outstanding. But Ben plays slightly differently, but has a lot of the same qualities, and just delighted to see him sort of step up and perform. And actually, he's another player that potentially you could stick him out in the centres and not a lot of change. And I don't think they will. I think you're going to sort of bank on one player. But the fact that the game's changed, and just to your point about Steve Borthwick's bold selection, I only think he's done a bold selection because Steve Borthwick looks at trends in games. He's so sort of, he's very data orientated, and he does look at trends that you'll have noticed any team that he coaches, the drop goals sort of come back into fashion, and he's sort of just starting to build some ideas that he thinks, well, when teams have been successful, what have they done? And I reckon he will have got a bit of confidence to do what he did off the back of Fabien Galtier's selection against Ireland, and Jegu, who was outstanding when he came on in the centres. Obviously, they lost Dupont. They were only carrying Luku on the bench, and then so that lost him very early, and then so Jegu had to come on the centres very early. And there was one moment where he looked like a back rower defending in the centres, but he recovered the situation on his own. So he stepped in too much, but somehow he got back out and made a really good tackle. So I think when you see other teams doing things, it's the same with how long ago? 4 years ago, we were saying, what's Rassie Erasmus doing? He's ruining the game, 6-2. Now everyone's got a 6-2 bench. It's trends that are successful for teams, and it's not that lot. We sort of say, is this a brand new thing? But there's been loads of players that have done it. I mean, Tom Young's played his first season at Leicester in the centres, and then moved to hooker, and Ashley Johnson for Wasps, back row hooker. Lavani Bottia has been playing the centre 7 role for years, and actually Ben Earl started in the centres, didn't he? So it's not, Australia are a team that have always swapped players around in the back line and not worried about too much about what position they are, partly because they've got less playing numbers. But I think with the way the game's going now, and the sort of the roles of all the players needing to be able to handle and defend, and it's only really the first phase where it's a real problem, and I can see Borthwick now being emboldened to go, right, yeah, we'll do this more until someone tells us not to, or someone comes up with something that's a better way of doing things.